The first thing I noticed wasn't the legalese. It was the smug look on Rachel's face. That slick, rehearsed expression people wear when they think they're being subtle but are actually screaming gotcha. We were sitting in a conference room overlooking the bay. Glass walls, filtered sunlight, bottled water with labels too fancy to drink. And across from me sat a man in a navy suit worth more than my first car, flanked by a monogrammed leather briefcase and a gold Mont Blanc pen he clearly brought just for effect. Thomas, Rachel began with that sing-song, PR voice she always slipped into around people she wanted to impress. Before we finalize the wedding plans, there's just one thing we should cover. Just a formality. A folder slid across the table. Cream-colored. Heavy paper stock. No initials, no title. Just blank confidence. The lawyer nodded. It's a standard prenuptial agreement. Very fair. I opened it. First page, fine. Definitions. Second page, not fine. A clause about separate property. Then another. Then 10 more. Each one delicately sewn to ensure Rachel's assets remained hers. Her condo, her brokerage accounts, her family legacy fund, read. A trust her uncle set up so she wouldn't blow her inheritance on handbags and quartz countertops. Then came the part that made me stop breathing through my nose. A forfeiture clause. If I challenged any provision of the agreement in the future, I would forfeit everything, even shared equity, even the house we'd picked together. That was the moment I stopped reading and looked up. Rachel smiled, like a hostess pretending the food hadn't come out cold. My lawyer thought we should be responsible, she repeated. With everything going on these days, divorces, lawsuits, it's just good sense. Good sense. Right. I slowly closed the folder. The lawyer leaned forward, expecting a signature or maybe a weak protest he could swat away with practiced condescension. Instead, I stood up. Enjoy your meeting, I said and left. No outburst. No slammed door. No speech. Just absence. Silence, used as a weapon. You'd be surprised how powerful that is, especially when people are bracing for a fight and all they get is vacuum. By the time the elevator hit the ground floor, I could already picture her confusion turning into irritation, then dread. Because I didn't play my part. I didn't plead, or argue, or sputter nonsense about trust and betrayal. I walked. And if you're still listening now, you're part of the 10% that gets it. Most won't. Over 90% of people who hear stories like this never subscribe, but every single click helps us keep building, one brick at a time. So if you're with me so far, subscribe. It means more than you know. Back in my car, I checked my watch. I wasn't late for anything, because I had made no other plans. But this little ambush, it had been planned, just not by her. Rachel didn't know that I had already started moving pieces months ago. She thought she was the one setting the tone of this relationship. What she didn't realize was that I'd seen this exact maneuver too many times before. 38 years in estate law, 10 of those advising ultra-high net worth divorces. People think cheating is the worst betrayal. It isn't. It's when someone plans your defeat while still calling it love. And that folder? That wasn't a prenup. That was her opening move. But I'd written the damn rulebook. The first 3 calls came less than 20 minutes after I stepped out of that office. I didn't answer. Didn't even look. I knew they were from her before the phone lit up. Rachel never used emojis. That's how I knew when she was serious. No winking faces, no hearts, just clipped sentences like polite gunfire. So I imagined the messages. Hey, can we talk? It wasn't meant to upset you. Please don't overreact. Let's be adults. Classic cleanup mode. Present the offense like a misunderstanding, then paint any backlash as irrational. I'd seen it 1,000 times in mediations. It was just a document. You're making this bigger than it is. She probably imagined I'd sulk for a few hours, then return with some compromise in hand. But the absence of a reaction is louder than any tantrum, especially to someone like Rachel, who thrives on controlling the narrative. By evening, my assistant forwarded me a message. Not the actual text, just her response. Per Mr. Eastman's request, I'm not authorized to relay personal messages from Ms. Abernathy. That must have stung. Rachel never liked going through underlings. She hated the idea that someone else had access to the gate. But that gate was now locked, and she had no key. I turned my phone off and spent the evening reorganizing a file cabinet. Not for necessity, just the comfort of order. My estate files were in 3 folders: active, archived, and contingency. I slid hers into the third. Not a dramatic gesture, just procedural. Meanwhile, Rachel was probably sitting in her penthouse kitchen, staring out at the skyline, telling herself I'd call by morning. Her lawyer, Alan, I think, would have reassured her. They always come back to the table when money's involved. He'd said it with that smug tone attorneys reserve for the less clever. Men like Alan didn't believe in consequences, just billable hours and leverage. But Alan didn't know what I knew. This wasn't about leverage anymore. It was about distance. Not the kind measured in miles, but the kind that makes someone you thought you knew feel like a stranger in their own mirror. Rachel called again. Twice the next day. I disabled voicemail. Her texts started stacking. She even left a comment under an old photo of us on some vineyard trip. Please call me. That was new. She'd never made a scene online before. Her curated image didn't allow for public begging. So I knew something was shifting. Not in me. In her. Because silence is only powerful if you're used to noise. And I'd gone quiet. Entirely. What she didn't know was that I wasn't punishing her. I was executing a plan. People always assume revenge is loud, explosive, full of yelling and slammed doors. But the most effective version looks exactly like indifference. Alan likely told her it was salvageable, that I was just upset, that emotions were high. But Alan was playing chess on a board he didn't realize I had built. From the wood, from the rules, from the damn floor under the table. Rachel still thought she was dealing with a man who'd been blindsided. But I hadn't blinked, hadn't flinched. Because you only flinch when you're caught off guard. And nothing about this surprised me. The only surprise was how fast she moved to secure herself. And how fast I moved to disappear from her version of the game. It started with a notification. Not a big one. Just a little account access restriction message that popped up while Rachel was reviewing her Chase private client dashboard. The Vineyard account, the one we discussed opening jointly for the acquisition of that little Sonoma plot, was grayed out. Frozen. Her first instinct was a glitch. She refreshed. Nothing. So she called. Her banker, Lena, a sharp ex-Wall Streeter with a soft voice and steel in her tone, picked up after 2 rings. Hi, Rachel, Lena said warmly. I was just about to call you, actually. That should have been her first red flag. About what? Rachel asked, breezy but already annoyed. Well, Lena continued. There's been a change to the access permissions on the Eastman Vine Trust account. It's now under restricted administration. We received a directive last week that all custodial control has been reassigned. Rachel blinked. Wait, what directive? From whom? Mr. Eastman's advisory office, Lena replied. He appointed an independent custodian and moved the account under a segregated trust structure. Rachel's voice shifted. That stiff, performative calm she used during investor meetings when the numbers didn't make sense. But we hadn't signed anything yet, she said. That account was just preliminary. Lena hesitated, just for a beat. He had full discretionary power as grantor. The instruments were signed 6 weeks ago, backdated into the trust system under provisional authority. Rachel's stomach flipped. She didn't say anything for a few seconds, just listened to the sound of her manicured fingers tapping against the marble countertop. Backdated. 6 weeks ago? That was before she even hinted at the prenup. Which meant this wasn't a reaction. It was a preemptive strike. She ended the call with a vague, thanks, I'll follow up, and walked over to the folder she'd stashed in her bedroom drawer. The one with the glossy vineyard brochure, the preliminary title reports, and the joint financing plan Thomas had reviewed over risotto 2 months ago. They'd talked about it like newlyweds talk about kitchen renovations, casual, romantic, full of shallow certainty. And now, that little account she thought was their shared dream project had become a locked box with no key. A ghost file under someone else's fingerprint. She called her attorney next. Alan sounded distracted. This isn't unusual, he mumbled. He's just trying to apply pressure. No, she snapped. This wasn't emotional. This was arranged. He set this up before I brought him the prenup. There was a silence on the line. A long one. Then Alan said something he probably thought sounded comforting. That just means he's a planner. You're still the fiancé. He wouldn't tank everything. But Rachel wasn't sure anymore. Not because Thomas had made a dramatic exit. He hadn't. But because everything after that exit was executed with such chilling precision. She'd expected sulking, maybe a cold shoulder. But not this. Not an operational shutdown. The worst part? She didn't know what else he had moved. Because the vineyard account was never the goal. It was the decoy. It gave her something to point at and say ours, while he quietly moved the real assets somewhere untouchable. She spent the next few hours combing through old emails, financial summaries, documents from their estate planning meetings, trying to piece together what she had assumed was mutual, but now realized had never really been shared. She couldn't shake the thought. What else did he prepare while smiling across the dinner table? Rachel wasn't just locked out of the vineyard. She was locked out of the strategy. And that was more terrifying than losing any plot of land. Because land can be bought. But once you're removed from someone's future plans, you're not just an outsider. You're a liability. Alan loved theatrics. Always had. He was the kind of attorney who spoke in closing arguments, even if you were just ordering coffee. So when Rachel stormed into his office the next morning, furious and flustered, he listened with arms crossed, pacing slowly like he was building up to a final act. "This is classic overcompensation," he said, tapping his temple like some kind of courtroom philosopher. "He's upset you challenged his ego with that prenup, so he's scrambling to lock things down. We'll file an emergency injunction, freeze the estate until we can force disclosures." Rachel nodded, still rattled from the vineyard account debacle. She needed certainty. Control. Alan's cocky grin offered both, until it didn't. They filed the motion by noon, a thick packet of paper and posture, stamped with the weight of entitlement. A judge wouldn't even need to grant it right away. Even the filing would send a message. That was the idea. But the response came faster than expected, and it wasn't what Alan had rehearsed in his head. At the county clerk's office, a young woman named Kim, probably fresh out of law school but disturbingly competent, scanned the documents, eyes narrowing. She clicked through a database silently, frowned, then looked up. "I can't process this." Alan raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" She turned the monitor slightly, tapped the screen. "The trust in question isn't under this court's jurisdiction anymore." "What?" Rachel said, leaning in. Kim cleared her throat. "It was reclassified under Federal Exemption 352B. Alan blinked. "That doesn't apply to privately held estates." "It does," Kim said. "If it was converted under sovereign shelter status and moved into multi-jurisdictional protective custody." Alan scoffed. "You're misreading it. Who signed off on that?" Kim didn't argue. She pulled up a scanned authorization document. "Mr. Thomas Eastman. 6 months ago." Rachel froze. 6 months. That was before the vineyard, before the proposal, before she even floated the idea of financial clarity between them. Kim kept scrolling. "Looks like the application was reviewed and cleared by a federal oversight board, plus 3 independent trustees, one of them from the Vermont Sovereign Asset Bureau." Alan's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Rachel just stared. He had moved everything. Not in a panic. Not after their argument. Before. He had restructured the estate to exist outside of her reach, not just legally, but geographically. The jurisdictional map alone looked like a federal shell game. Part of it protected under charitable exemption in Montana, another part under an independent vineyard license registered through an LLC in British Columbia, and the rest sitting under a sovereign shelter parked through a legal provision only about 6 people in the country even understood. Alan finally tried to regain footing. "We'll appeal. That kind of move needs cohabitation disclosure." "No, it doesn't," Kim said. "Not under sovereign split status between unmarried parties." He declared intent and preemptive revocability. "It's ironclad." She printed a receipt and stapled the original motion to it. "We'll still file your documents," she added politely. "But they won't stop anything. This isn't under us anymore." Rachel felt her legs start to shake. Not visibly, but enough that she didn't want to stand anymore. Alan, to his credit, didn't say anything as they walked out. But once they were in the car, he muttered it. "Jesus Christ, he beat us 6 months ago." Rachel didn't respond. She was already replaying every dinner conversation, every passive moment where Thomas nodded along to her ideas of prenups and asset management, letting her think she was steering the ship. But he'd already pulled the anchor, already charted another course, and she hadn't even seen it. This wasn't a defense. It was a preparation. And now she realized something far worse than betrayal. She had underestimated him. Not emotionally, strategically. And Thomas Eastman didn't just plan estates. He buried them. The envelope arrived without a courier, without tracking, without fanfare. Just a simple white rectangle, slipped through the slit of her luxury apartment's brass mail slot like it belonged there. No logo. No return address. But the weight of it, it felt expensive. Heavy, archival paper. Cotton blend. The kind of thing you only use when you're trying to send a message money can't carry. Rachel opened it without sitting down, peeling the flap with one perfectly manicured nail, expecting some sad attempt at groveling. A note, maybe. A plea. A veiled olive branch. But inside, there was only one item. A certified, notarized restatement of the Eastman Family Trust. 17 pages. Dated. Filed. Sealed. Her name was nowhere. Not in the main body. Not in the annex. Not even in the event of marriage contingency clause. Not even as a provisional beneficiary. Instead, 2 names stood in black ink, his older sister, Lorraine, who hadn't attended a single one of their engagement events, and a man named Malcolm R. Voss, whom Rachel had only heard Thomas refer to in passing as an old friend from the policy days. He was listed as legal executor, financial custodian, and designated fallback in the event of the grantor's incapacitation. There wasn't a single comma wasted on Rachel. She flipped the pages as if a name might fall out from between them. Nothing. The trust had been completely restated after his retirement. And every asset, real estate, securities, private equity shares, intellectual property, even a royalties clause from some obscure textbook he co-authored in the 90s, had been consolidated under a legal structure Rachel had never seen before. She called Alan. He picked up on the second ring. No trace of his usual courtroom swagger. "Did you know," she said, voice shaking, "that he filed the Eastman Trust under something called a sovereign land code exemption?" There was a long pause. Then Alan spoke, slow and clipped. "Yes, I found out about it after the injunction was denied. I've been reading up on it. And it's bulletproof." Her legs gave way. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the envelope in her hand like it might turn into a bomb. "He moved everything into a sovereign framework," Alan continued. "It's tied to legacy land code from a territorial act no longer on the books, but grandfathered in for prior government contractors. He probably qualified from his policy advisory years." "You're telling me I have no claim?" "I'm telling you," Alan said. "You were never in it." Her mind spiraled. How? How could he do all of this? How could he plan this deeply, without her noticing? But the answer was obvious. Because he'd let her believe she was in control. That smile at dinners. The way he deferred decisions. The way he'd handed her brochures for dream homes and tasting room expansion, like he was waiting for her input. None of it was real. It was staging. Theater. He wasn't deciding with her. He was watching her decide how to expose herself. And when she walked into that law office last week with her polished little prenup and her smug little speech, she didn't just tip her hand. She triggered a protocol that had been waiting for the smallest betrayal. And now she stood in a $3.2 million high-rise looking at 17 pages that confirmed what she feared the most. She was irrelevant. Not just legally. Existentially. Thomas Eastman had removed her with a pen. And the silence that followed was the sound of finality. Rachel had always kept one ace in her pocket, Professor Elias Corrin, her mentor from law school, tenured, sharp, and quietly feared in certain estate litigation circles. When Rachel graduated, it was Elias who got her into her first real firm. When she left that firm, it was Elias who wrote her the kind of glowing letter that got passed around boardrooms like prophecy. He was the man you called when the rules didn't bend. He made the rules. So when she stared at the trust documents and felt her throat dry out, she did what she hadn't done in years. She asked for help. She didn't text. She emailed. Attached the scanned restatement, the summary of the sovereign exemption, a few PDFs of the vineyard account restructuring. Subject line, review request, private. No context. No crying. No drama. Just the facts. She sent it at 11:08 p.m. At 11:21 p.m., her inbox pinged. One sentence. "Why on earth did you try to corner him with a prenup?" That was it. No greeting. No sign-off. No analysis. Just a scalpel through her entire illusion. She stared at the screen like it had slapped her. Corner him? She'd never thought of it that way. Not openly. She called it responsibility, clarity, just smart modern planning. Words that sounded noble until you stripped the lacquer off. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. "Did I do something wrong?" she typed, then deleted it. Instead, she wrote, "You know him?" The reply came 5 minutes later. "He's not just a planner, Rachel. He wrote part of Title 12, subsection F, Estate Restructuring Framework. I taught one of his white papers for years before I realized he ghost-authored half of it under the Treasury Advisory Board. You're not dealing with a client. You challenged the architect." The screen blurred slightly. She hadn't noticed her eyes stinging. Another ping. "He's one of 5 men I know who can build a trust inside a trust with legacy clauses that survive federal restructuring. One more. There's no version of this where you win. Not legally. Not technically. Not socially." She leaned back, barely breathing. Her apartment felt colder. Or maybe smaller. Because she understood what Elias was really saying. She hadn't just misjudged Thomas. She'd insulted him. With a form letter prenup she hadn't even drafted herself. A boilerplate document, barely tailored, shoved across a conference table like a chess move against someone who designed the damn board. And what was worse? She could remember the exact moment she did it. That subtle smirk she gave when he opened the folder. The look that said this is how it's going to be. The power she thought she held. And he had absorbed it, quietly. Because that's what real architects do. They let the storm pass. Then show you the building was never yours to begin with. She picked up her phone, thumb trembling slightly, and opened his contact. Still blocked. Of course. Because this wasn't about anger. It was about inclusion. And he had already decided she was no longer part of the structure. He didn't revoke a plan. He revoked her. Alan's office felt more like a bunker than a law firm that morning. Rachel sat across from him, legs crossed tightly, eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses even though they were indoors. She hadn't slept. Anyone could see that. But she wouldn't admit it. Wouldn't give it power. That was her style. Alan, on the other hand, looked like a man who just realized the bottom step wasn't there and was still falling in slow motion. "We need to shift the narrative," he said, tapping a pen against a yellow legal pad, though he hadn't written a damn thing. "Control the optics. Release a joint statement. Mutual respect, amicable dissolution, all that PR fluff. People don't care about facts, Rachel. They care about tone. Make it look like you two agreed to walk away. Make it boring." Rachel didn't answer. She was scrolling, reading something over and over again on her phone, lips pressed so tight they were turning white. "What?" Alan finally asked. She turned the screen around and placed it on the desk. No sound, no fanfare, just a headline from Estate and Equity Quarterly, a trade publication barely read by the general public but obsessively devoured in legal and financial circles. The headline: "Revocable Trusts and Revocable People, a Note from Thomas Eastman." Alan frowned. That's not even a wait. She zoomed in on the pull quote. "I was recently reminded why some partnerships require full transparency before trust is offered. Fortunately, trust, legally speaking, remains revocable. Simple. No names. No timeline. No slander. Just implication." And it spread like gasoline under a lit match. Within hours, the note was reposted across legal subreddits, Twitter accounts run by estate advisors, and 3 different financial commentary newsletters. It had that awful, perfect balance of tone: detached, professional, clinical, but deeply personal. The kind of thing that made every reader lean in and whisper to themselves, who did he write this about? Some already knew. Rachel's name wasn't printed anywhere. But it didn't have to be. Legal circles are small. Private wealth advisors are tighter than country club cliques. And when you're dealing with a man like Thomas, who had co-authored frameworks, advised senators, been the guy at those quiet, off-the-record symposiums, the story walked without needing to be pushed. It wasn't just a memo. It was a warning that he had seen something, documented it, and decided to disengage with full justification. And in their world, that's all it took. Rachel's LinkedIn inbox exploded, not with support, but with silence. The kind of unread messages that used to arrive daily suddenly stopped. No invites to panels. No replies from contacts she used to consider close. One firm quietly canceled her scheduled appearance at a women in finance luncheon. Optics, they said. Meanwhile, Thomas? He didn't tweet, didn't post follow-ups, didn't leak anything else. He didn't need to. He'd released a single, weaponized sentence into the bloodstream of his industry, and it was doing all the work. Alan rubbed his face. This wasn't about the prenup. This is legacy warfare. Rachel didn't look up, because deep down, she knew the most painful part. He hadn't attacked her. He'd simply withdrawn belief in her. Trust, offered once, was now revoked. And in their world, that meant exile. Not with shouting, but with silence so deliberate, it echoed louder than any press release her entire legal team could manufacture. The letter arrived with a wax seal, not red, not dramatic, but a soft gray with a clean impression of a tree ring. Thomas's old insignia. It had once adorned his firm's holiday wine labels, embossed into parchment gift cards, etched into the corks of the bottles they sent to board members and legacy clients. Now, it marked something else entirely: finality. Rachel opened it slowly this time. No rush. No panic. Just resignation. She already knew it wouldn't be friendly, but she wasn't prepared for how unfriendly it would be while still sounding gracious. Inside was a 2-page overview, printed on heavy linen paper. The title: Eastman Foundation Legacy Realignment Notice. It took her 2 reads to even understand what she was looking at. The estate, the one she had envisioned stepping into like a curated museum tour. Vineyard properties in Napa and Woodinville. Antique collections held under private insurance. The small portfolio of biotech stock Thomas had once vaguely referred to as a sleeper. Everything had been rolled into a private foundation. Not a public trust. Not a family grantor vehicle. A charitable entity registered under 501(c)(3) protections, with specific clauses defining conditional disbursement, public service obligations, and most notably, revocation triggers. She read one clause 3 times before her vision started to swim. In the event of any legal contest, filing, or claim, direct or indirect, by any individual previously engaged in a romantic contract with the grantor, said individual shall be rendered ineligible for access, participation, or consultation in perpetuity. There was a note in parentheses beneath it. This includes, but is not limited to, prenuptial negotiations filed in adversarial context. That's when her fingers went numb. The prenup. Her prenup. The one she presented with that fake smile preamble about responsibility and protecting both of us. It had been the trigger, not just socially, not just emotionally, legally. She tried to hold the paper steady. Couldn't. Her own chess move had activated a landmine. The estate hadn't been locked away after the fact. It had been structured to respond to betrayal. Like a pressure plate in a museum vault. It wasn't just the property that had been transferred. The framework had shifted. The Eastman Foundation now owned the assets, but Thomas had retained operational distance as a founder emeritus, which meant he could step away and still know that every bottle of wine, every painting, every damn stock split now answered to a board of trustees handpicked by him, but technically separate. He didn't own the estate anymore, which meant Rachel couldn't sue him for it, couldn't petition, couldn't even negotiate. Because how do you bargain with an entity designed to never talk back? She called Alan again. Straight to voicemail. Left a message. Call me back. Urgent. Please. I just read the... Click. She hung up. Pointless. She opened her laptop and typed the name of the foundation into a search bar. There it was, clean as daylight. IRS verified. Mission statement focused on long-term conservation of historical estates, education, and ethical legacy preservation. Ethical. That word scraped against her like sandpaper. She had imagined herself pouring wine at donor galas, giving guided tours of their collection, sitting on the board like some high society matriarch. Instead, she was reading a clause that carved her out of that entire future with surgical precision. Thomas hadn't just removed her from his life. He'd sterilized the future of her ever-laying claim to his world. And all she had to do to lock herself out was try to secure a seat at the table. It was the oldest trap in estate law. Bait the entitled party into pressing too soon, and then let the mechanism punish the assumption. She had played offense, but he had written the rules. And now, she wasn't just out of the game. She was barred from the stadium. Rachel was curled on her sectional in a robe that still smelled faintly of that citrus detergent Thomas used to buy in bulk. He said it was satisfyingly unscented, which made no sense, but somehow fit him perfectly. The TV was on but muted. A wine glass half full, or maybe half empty. She couldn't decide. Her phone buzzed against the marble coffee table. Alan's name. She answered on the first ring. Please tell me you have something. She heard him inhale. Not the usual inhale then answer that lawyers use to sound in control. No, this one was longer. Uneven. Like someone breathing through a paper bag after realizing the fire exit was welded shut. I spoke to a friend at the Office of Financial Strategies. He began, voice low and fast. Someone who handles legacy shelter constructs. He dug into Eastman's filings. And, she snapped. Alan didn't posture this time. Rachel, it's worse than I thought. She gripped the arm of the couch. Thomas placed the entire estate under a grantor trust with a reversion trigger. It activates in response to any legal action interpreted as adversarial intent. I don't speak trust jargon right now, Alan. English. Alan's voice dropped, like he hated the words coming out of his own mouth. In English, you serve him a prenup. That counts as adversarial. The trigger fired the moment you handed him that folder. And when it did, everything in that trust was instantly, irrevocably rerouted to foundation custody. Rachel's jaw clenched. But he didn't own everything. Not yet. Some of it was still in transition. No, he structured the timing. Legally, the pending assets were under provisional clauses, meaning he kept the paperwork just shy of final until the trigger. It was a trap. She stood up, knocking over the wine glass. It rolled, deep red soaking into the cream carpet like blood and snow. Alan, tell me there's a loophole. Silence. Alan. Rachel. You can't even mention his name in a court filing now. The trust has a name severance clause. Any attempt to invoke his identity in legal action activates non-cooperation protocols. His name is sealed. She couldn't breathe. You're saying I can't sue him? You can try, Alan muttered. But you'll be filing against an empty chair. Everything you knew about him, his accounts, assets, rights, they've all been evacuated, relocated. The name Thomas Eastman is now a figurehead, a person without possessions, a ghost. She sat down hard, knees buckling. Her ears rang. Ghost. The man she'd once imagined growing old with, sitting in vineyard kitchens, naming cheese platters after grandchildren. They were gone. Not because he vanished, because she pulled the pin. And now, there was nothing left to fight for. No negotiation. No amicable split. No leveraging of what they'd built together. Because they hadn't built anything. She'd been standing on scaffolding, and he had pulled the foundation out from beneath her the moment she thought it was smart to test him. A prenup. That's all it took. For pages. One folder. A fake smile, and a pen she borrowed from the receptionist. She thought she was protecting herself. Instead, she'd triggered a chain reaction meticulously designed to erase her from every ledger, filing, and clause Thomas had ever touched. And now, not only did she lose the game, she was erased from the board. It was raining, because of course it was. That soft, petty kind of rain that doesn't pour. It just soaks you out of spite. Rachel stood at the foot of the driveway, clutching the wrought iron gate like it might open out of pity. Her heels dug into the gravel, now clumped with wet clay. She looked smaller than she ever had, her hair unmade, face raw, tears streaked through a layer of mascara applied in desperation rather than habit. Beyond the gate, the house stood like a monument, quiet, modern, and somehow indifferent. Thomas's house. No, not his house anymore, not technically. It belonged to the foundation now, but still, it had his fingerprint, his design, his quiet control. A figure appeared in the distance. Slow steps on clean stone. No umbrella. No rush. Just him. Calm. Deliberate. Thomas Eastman. He looked older. Not aged, but refined. Sharper, somehow. Like a knife honed by silence. The lines around his eyes weren't from stress. They were from seeing things clearly. Rachel didn't move. He stopped a few feet from the gate. No anger. No curiosity. Just presence. She opened her mouth. Her voice cracked. You knew. She whispered, rain catching her breath. You knew I'd asked for a prenup, didn't you? He didn't answer right away. Just studied her like she was a name he'd already erased from a ledger, but hadn't quite forgotten how to pronounce. I hoped you wouldn't, he said finally. Soft. No malice. She stared at him. Her hands trembled. I didn't mean, she started, but even she didn't know how that sentence ended. Thomas reached into the inner pocket of his coat, pulled out a small white envelope, weathered but intact. No seal, just folded, with quiet weight. He passed it through the bars. She took it, fingers shaking. He didn't say anything more. Didn't offer closure. He just turned and walked back. No theatrics. No monologue. Just retreat. Rachel stood there for a full minute before peeling the envelope open. Inside was a single sheet of letterhead. The old kind, thick, cotton weight. His name embossed in the corner from a consultancy that no longer existed. Dated. A full year before they met. Typed in the center, one line. If love ever becomes leverage, lock the vault. Signed beneath it. Thomas Eastman. She stared at the signature. It wasn't angry. It wasn't cold. It was precise. Preemptive. She had thought she was clever, guarding herself, playing smart, hedging risk. But Thomas hadn't been playing. He had predicted. Not the betrayal. Not the timing. Not the wording of her prenup. He had predicted the type of person she might become, and prepared the system to survive it. Not destroy her. Survive her. And that was the final wound. Because revenge, she could have understood. She could have fought that. Screamed against it. Countered with lawyers and narratives and sympathy. But this wasn't revenge. This was design. And it was perfect.